A lot of us see the Bible as a collection of stories. The Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, the burning bush, and those stories are real. But if that's all you see, you're missing the spine that holds the entire book together. Because underneath every story, every law, every prophecy, there is a single thread. One agreement that God keeps initiating and deepening, no matter how many times the other party walks away. The Bible isn't a collection of stories, it's one covenant, told 7 different ways. And once you see that, every part of the Bible that ever confused you starts to make sense. That's where we're going today. But before we start, we need to define the word itself. The English word covenant comes from the Latin convenire, to come together, to agree. But the Hebrew word is brit, berit. And berit is not a business contract. It's not a handshake deal. It's a binding bond between 2 parties sealed by solemn oath. And in the ancient world, when you made a berit, you weren't just signing a document. You were staking your life on it. The covenant ceremony in the ancient Near East involved cutting animals in half and walking between the pieces. The symbolism was unmistakable. May what happened to these animals happen to me if I break this agreement. In Hebrew, you don't make a covenant, you cut one. Karet berit, cut a covenant. So every time God enters into a covenant relationship with humanity, something is being cut, something is at stake. And what we'll discover by the end of this video is that it was always God who bore the cost of the cutting, not us. There are 7 covenants in Scripture. Some scholars count differently depending on how they categorize sub-agreements, but 7 is the framework that best captures what's actually happening. And the number 7 in Hebrew thought isn't accidental. It's the number of completeness, of wholeness, of Sabbath rest. 7 covenants, 1 story. Let's walk through each one. Covenant 1, the Edenic covenant. Genesis 1-2, the covenant of purpose. The first covenant is so foundational that most people don't even recognize it as a covenant at all. God creates a man and a woman, places them in a garden, and gives them a commission. Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over every living creature. And then, Genesis 2:16-17. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. There it is, a covenant structure, a relationship, a commission, a boundary, and a consequence. But here's what most people miss about this first agreement. The Hebrew word used in Genesis 2 for how God formed the man is yatsar, the same word used for a potter shaping clay. God didn't manufacture humanity on an assembly line. He shaped humanity the way an artisan shapes something they care about, and he placed that shaped creature in a garden he had already prepared, a place of provision and beauty and access to himself. The Edenic covenant is not primarily about a rule. It's about a relationship, God and humanity dwelling together, working together. The commission to fill the earth and subdue it is an invitation to be partners in the ongoing act of creation. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil wasn't placed there to trap anyone. It was placed there because genuine relationship requires genuine choice. A love that cannot say no is not love at all. It's programming. And then, Genesis 3. The choice is made, the boundary is crossed, and something shatters. But notice what God does immediately afterward. He doesn't leave. He comes looking. Where are you? Genesis 3:9. The first question God ever asks a human being isn't an accusation. It's a search. And in the middle of the consequences, the thorns, the toil, the exile from the garden, God makes a promise in verse 15. One of the most important verses in the entire Bible, though it's easy to walk right past it. God says to the serpent, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." Theologians call this the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, the first announcement that what just broke will one day be fixed, that a descendant of the woman will deal the decisive blow to the serpent, though not without being wounded himself. The story isn't over, it just moved to the next chapter. Covenant 2, the Noahic covenant. Genesis 6-9, the covenant of preservation. Time passes, generations multiply, and Genesis 6 delivers one of the most sobering sentences in all of Scripture. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6:5. Not occasionally evil, not mostly evil, only evil, all the time. But then, verse 8, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. The Hebrew word for favor is hen, chen, grace, unearned acceptance. Before Noah did anything to deserve it, before he built anything, before he obeyed anything, he found chen in God's eyes. The covenant with Noah doesn't begin with Noah's obedience. It begins with God's favor. The flood comes, the waters recede, and in Genesis 9, God establishes his covenant with Noah, and through Noah, with every living creature on earth. Genesis 9:11. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. And then the sign, a rainbow. Now here's something the English completely hides from you. The Hebrew word for rainbow is keshet, keshet. But keshet doesn't mean rainbow. Keshet means war bow. It's the same word used in Lamentations 2:4, where God strings his bow like an enemy in battle. In the ancient world, when a warrior hung up his bow after a battle, it was a sign that the fighting was over. When God places his keshet in the clouds, he is hanging up his war bow. He is saying, "The judgment is finished. I will not draw this back against you again." God is disarming himself, in plain sight, as a promise to humanity. The Noahic covenant is unconditional. It requires nothing from Noah or his descendants to remain in force. It is held entirely by God's own commitment, and it is cosmic in scope, not just for humans, but for every living creature. Before God ever asks anything from humanity, he makes a promise to all of it. Covenant 3, the Abrahamic covenant. Genesis 12:15-17, the covenant of promise. Several generations after Noah, God speaks to a man named Abram living in Ur of the Chaldees, modern-day Iraq, and says something that must have sounded completely insane. Genesis 12:1-3. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. No explanation, no map, no timeline, just go. And Abram goes. But 3 chapters later, after years of waiting and no heir in sight, Abram asks a very human question. Genesis 15:8. Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? How do I know you'll keep your word? And God's answer is the most extraordinary moment in the entire Abrahamic narrative. He tells Abram to bring animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, a pigeon. Abram cuts them in half and arranges the pieces. This is the Berit ceremony, the ancient covenant ritual. Both parties were supposed to walk between the pieces. But then Genesis 15:12, a deep sleep falls on Abram. In verse 17, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. Abram doesn't walk between the pieces. God does, alone. In the ancient world, this was unthinkable. Both parties were supposed to walk the path together, both taking the oath, both accepting the curse for breaking it. But God walks alone. He takes both sides of the oath. He says in effect, if this covenant is broken, let the judgment fall on me, not you, me. And it did. But that's the sixth covenant. The Abrahamic covenant has three core promises. Land, I will give you this land. Descendants, I will make you a great nation. And blessing, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Genesis 12, 2-3. Chapter 17 adds one more dimension. God changes Abram's name to Abraham, father of many nations, and gives the covenant its sign, circumcision. Every male in Abraham's household, a physical mark cut into the body, a permanent reminder that this covenant is sealed in flesh. And here is what makes the Abrahamic covenant the pivot point of the entire Old Testament. It is unconditional. God doesn't say, if you obey, I will bless. He says, I will. 3 times in 3 chapters. I will make you. I will bless you. I will give you. Every subsequent covenant in the Bible is building on this one. The Mosaic covenant doesn't replace it. The Davidic covenant extends it. The new covenant fulfills it. When Paul writes in Galatians 3:29 that if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise, he's saying the Abrahamic covenant is still active, right now, in you. Covenant 4, the Mosaic covenant. Exodus 19-24 and Deuteronomy, the covenant of law. 400 years pass. Abraham's descendants multiply, just as promised, and end up enslaved in Egypt. God raises up Moses, delivers Israel through 10 plagues in a parted sea, and brings them to the foot of a mountain in the wilderness, Sinai. And here God does something he has never done before. He enters into a covenant not with one man, but with an entire nation. Exodus 19:5-6. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Notice the structure immediately. If you obey, then you will be. This is the first covenant in the Bible with a bilateral, conditional structure. The Noahic covenant was unconditional. The Abrahamic covenant was unconditional. But the Mosaic covenant has an if. The Torah, the 613 commandments of the law, isn't a new way to be saved. Abraham was declared righteous in Genesis 15:6 before circumcision, before the law, before anything. The Torah isn't the path to relationship, it's the shape of the relationship for a people who are already in covenant. Think of it this way. When you get married, you don't follow the terms of your marriage certificate to become someone's spouse. You follow them because you already are. The law is Israel's marriage covenant, the terms of life inside the relationship God already initiated with Abraham. But there's a problem built into this covenant from the start, and the Bible is honest about it. Deuteronomy 31:29. Moses himself says, I know that after my death you are sure to become utterly corrupt and to turn from the way I have commanded you. Moses finishes giving the law and immediately predicts its failure. Not because the law is bad. Romans 7:12 is clear. The law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. The problem is not the law. The problem is the heart. The law is written on stone, and stone doesn't transform a heart. The Mosaic covenant comes with blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. Deuteronomy 28 spells them out in devastating detail. And the tragic arc of the entire historical narrative from Joshua to 2 Kings is the story of Israel choosing the curses one generation at a time. But here's what you must not miss. The Mosaic covenant doesn't cancel the Abrahamic covenant. Galatians 3:17, the law, introduced 430 years later, does not set aside the covenant previously established by God, and thus do away with the promise. The Mosaic covenant is a chapter in the story, not the final chapter. Covenant 5, the priestly covenant. Numbers 25, the covenant of zeal. This one is brief and most people skip it entirely. In Numbers 25, Israel is committing mass idolatry and sexual immorality at Peor. People are dying. And a man named Phinehas, grandson of Aaron the high priest, takes a spear and drives it through an Israelite man and a Midianite woman in the act of their sin. It's a jarring scene. But God's response is in Numbers 25:12-13. I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant of a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God. A covenant of peace, Beret Shalom, given to a man who just killed someone. How do those two things fit together? Because Phinehas' actions stopped the plague that was killing Israel. His zeal for God's holiness, executed at personal risk, turned away the judgment that was falling on the entire community. The priestly covenant establishes that Israel's relationship with God will be mediated. There will be a priesthood, a line of people set apart to stand between the holy God and the people, to bear the weight of the covenant on behalf of the community. And the entire sacrificial system, every animal ever offered on the altar of Israel, was the priestly covenant being enacted. Something has to bear the cost of the broken covenant. Something has to die. Which is why Hebrews 7 makes such a seismic argument. Jesus isn't just a new teacher or a new prophet. He is a new kind of priest, not from Aaron's line, but from the order of Melchizedek, a priest-king, who appears in Genesis 14 with no genealogy, no beginning of days, no end of life. A priest forever, Psalm 110:4. The Aaronic priesthood had a flaw built into it. The priests kept dying. Hebrews 7:23. There have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. One priest, one offering, once for all. The priestly covenant was never meant to be permanent. It was always a pointer. Covenant 6, the Davidic covenant. 2 Samuel 7 and Psalm 89. The covenant of the king. Centuries pass, the judges fail, Israel demands a king. Saul rises and falls, and then comes David, the shepherd boy from Bethlehem who becomes Israel's greatest king. And in 2 Samuel 7, God comes to David with a covenant that changes everything. David wants to build a house for God, a temple. And God says, in one of the great reversals of the Old Testament, "You want to build me a house? I'm going to build you one." 2 Samuel 7:12-13. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And verse 16, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. The Hebrew word for forever here is volam, olam. It means to the vanishing point, as far as you can see, and then beyond. This is not a political promise with an expiration date. This is an unconditional, eternal guarantee. David's line will not end. A descendant of David will sit on a throne that never falls. And then history seems to contradict it. Because the Babylonians come in 586 BC. They destroy Jerusalem. They tear down the temple. They drag the last Davidic king, Zedekiah, into captivity. They kill his sons in front of him and blind him, so the last thing he ever sees is the death of his heirs. David's throne appears to be over. But the book of Jeremiah ends in its very last paragraph, with a detail so quiet you can almost miss it. Jehoiakim, the exiled Davidic king, is released from prison in Babylon. He eats at the king's table for the rest of his life. The seed is still alive. And 600 years after Zedekiah's capture, Matthew 1:1 opens with these words, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." The covenant with David wasn't broken by the exile, it was waiting. Covenant 7, the new covenant. Jeremiah 31, Luke 22, Hebrews 8-10. The covenant of the heart. We've arrived at the center because all 6 covenants before this one were pointing at something they could not themselves accomplish. The Edenic covenant showed us the problem. The human heart chooses wrong. The Noahic covenant preserved the world. The Abrahamic covenant gave us the promise. The Mosaic covenant gave us the shape of the relationship but couldn't change the heart that kept breaking it. The priestly covenant gave us a system to manage the consequences but couldn't eliminate them. The Davidic covenant gave us the hope of a king who would reign forever, but none of them could fix the heart. And then Jeremiah, writing in the darkest hour of Israel's history with the Babylonian army literally outside the gates of Jerusalem, writes what theologians call the New Covenant passage. Jeremiah 31:31-34. "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts." The Hebrew phrase is Brit Hadashah, Berit Hadashah, New Covenant. It is the only place in the entire Hebrew Bible where that exact phrase appears. And the word Hadashah, new, is richer than the English suggests. It doesn't only mean brand new, never existed before. It also means renewed, refreshed, restored. The same root is used in Lamentations 5:21, renew our days as of old. The same root describes the new moon each month, not a different moon, but the same moon, renewed. The new covenant isn't a different God making a different deal with different people. It is the same God, the same people, the same relationship, but now internalized. Now written not on tablets of stone, but on the heart. On the lev, the Hebrew word for heart that refers not to emotions, but to the mind, the will, the seat of decision-making. The law doesn't change. Where the law lives, changes, from outside to inside, from obligation to identity, from I must to I want to. And verse 34 adds one more thing that no previous covenant offered. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Not manage, not cover, not defer, forget. The Hebrew word is zakar, to remember. And God says, I will not zakar your sin anymore. In the ancient world, to say you would not remember something was to say you would not act on it. God is promising that the record of broken covenant will be permanently cleared, not just covered by sacrifice after sacrifice, cleared. This is what Hebrews 8:6 calls a better covenant established on better promises. And Hebrews 10:1-4 explains why the old covenant's sacrifices could never do what this one does. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. They could point to the solution. They could create a system of consequence management, but they could not reach the root. Now we come to the moment when the new covenant is inaugurated, not with animal pieces laid in a field, not with fire passing between carcasses in the dark, with bread and wine in an upper room. Luke 22:20. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood which is poured out for you. Berit Hadashah, the exact phrase from Jeremiah 31. Jesus quotes it at the Last Supper. Do you understand what he is doing? He is doing what God did in Genesis 15. He is walking the path alone. He is taking both sides of the covenant oath. He is saying, The cost of every broken covenant, the Edenic, the Mosaic, every failure, every idolatry, every cracked cistern, I will bear it, in my body, on a cross. The smoking firepot and the blazing torch from Genesis 15, the presence of God moving alone between the pieces of the covenant animals. That moment finds its fulfillment in the darkness of Golgotha. God took the oath alone in Genesis 15, and he paid the price alone in the first century. Because the new covenant isn't new in the sense of replacing everything before it. It's new in the sense of finally completing what all the others were building toward. The pattern the whole time was a God who initiates, who preserves, who promises, who gives shape to the relationship, who provides mediation, who sustains the royal line, and who finally, in the person of Jesus, writes the law on hearts and absorbs the cost of every failure. Here's the thread, in one breath. Eden showed us what was lost. Noah showed us God preserves what he starts. Abraham showed us the promise that can't be canceled. Moses showed us what the relationship looks like and how badly we need something deeper. Phinehas showed us that the relationship requires mediation, a priest who can stand in the gap. David showed us that a king is coming whose throne will never end. And Jeremiah announced what that king would bring, a covenant cut not in animal flesh but in his own, writing the law not on stone that can be smashed or scrolls that can be burned, but on the one thing that actually needs to change. The heart. 7 covenants, 1 God, 1 people, 1 unfolding plan. And right now, in this moment, the new covenant is active, not because you performed the ritual, not because you kept the rules, because the one who made the promise is also the one who kept it. That's not generic comfort. That's the specific architecture of a book that has been building toward one thing from the very first garden. Come back to the fountain, the one that never dries up, and drink. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one. God bless.